Here's my talk. Hold my beer and watch this. Everybody has to wonder what that has to do with Perl. Well, beer, Perl, naturally. So let me do a quick disclaimer first. I gave an earlier version of this talk at FOSDEM this year in Belgium, and I gave another one at the Amsterdam X Perl Mongers meeting as well, and I've been refining it, but I recently had to convert this from PowerPoint to Keynote, and so there was a lot of formatting mess-ups and stuff like that. And so I left early for the social thing with the intent of spending time in my room and just hanging out and practicing on a few beers and cleaning things up. I should have known when issuing a challenge to GeneHack on Twitter that I should have seen this one coming. And honestly, after typing that comment, I probably should have really rethought my life. So any formatting weirdness on any of the slides or anything like that is GeneHack's fault. So please, everyone, please use this hashtag. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Stevan Little. This is my CPAN ID, my email, which CPAN thankfully provides, GitHub, Twitter, and my local Perl Mongers group is the Amsterdam X, X standing for expat. It's a Perl Mongers group in the Netherlands that is specifically in English, and it's for the expats. Speaking of that, I work at Booking.com. If we are always hiring, and we're always looking for good Perl programmers. If you're at all interested in moving to the Netherlands, I don't know why you might want to leave this country right now. But if you're at all interested, come and talk to me. If you're worried, well, I have a family, I couldn't do that. I have a very big family. 6 of us moved over there. It worked. It's possible. So come talk to me if you're interested. After the talk, please. So that's enough of sponsoring. Or I'm sorry, they pay for my ticket, so I have to do this. As I said, my name is Stevan. I respond to any variation on pronunciation of this name. That's one of the fun things about working at Booking is we have such a diverse group of people there that they all pronounce it all many different ways. So I've just had to get used to it.
Got it, Steven.
Perfect, thank you. This talk is about something that I've been working on for a very, very long time. And it goes back to actually 2004 when I got involved in the PUGS project, which was sort of a Perl 6 on Haskell. And I found myself drawn to the object system. And in particular, the meta object system that would underlie the real object system there. So it all started in 2004. In 2005, I wrote Moose. Some of you may know this module. And then in 2010, I started a project called P5 Mop. And the idea was to put together some of the nice parts of Moose and basically rebuild them so that they'd be suitable for placement inside the core of Perl 5. So I think Damien made a joke about installing Moose installs half a CPAN. This has been a long joke. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't even have to do that? So that was the thought. 2017, you're about to see. And hopefully in a couple years I'll be able to make some money off of this or something. I don't know. We'll see. This project has been a long time going, and it has gone through a lot of different, basically I've gotten a ton of conference talks out of this thing. It started out as simply P5 Mop. There was a P5 Mini Mop because the P5 Mop was a little bit too complicated, and actually we wanted to bootstrap the P5 Mop with a P5 Mop, but we needed a Mini Mop to bootstrap. Yeah, it gets really, really crazy there. It was not good. It ended badly. At some point, well, I went off into the woods and wrote something in Scala that was meant to be sort of like a Perl 5.5, and I want to forget about that these days. Yeah, Mo, thank you. P5 Mop Redux was returning to it. I had spent, I think, I don't know, there was like a year that I had sort of walked away from it, and then I sort of went and looked back at it, and I had an inspiration, so I started in again. That also didn't really, it kind of got far, but it didn't get too far. And what I realized was that I didn't know the core of Perl well enough, so I spent about a year learning C and XS in the core of Perl, and I produced P5 Mop XS, which pretty much just segfaulted. because a year is not long enough to learn all those things. And then I jokingly named a repository this, but it ended up sticking for a while. And this actually was where what I believe is the final design happened. So how many of you know what a mop is when I say this word? Okay, there's a few people who don't. So a mop is essentially an API around these things. Okay, your classes, your methods, slots is the name. In Moose, they're called attributes, but because I'm trying to put this into the core Perl and attributes is already a name that's taken, I had to come up with another one, and I just stole it from Lisp, which I steal a lot of things from Lisp, and we use slots, and then instances. It's important to notice the uppercase in front of each one of these, okay? These are proper nouns. These aren't just a class keyword and a method keyword and stuff like that. These are the objects that represent these things. Sometimes I actually like to explain it this way, okay? So an abstraction, which is the mop, that models a system of abstractions, classes, methods, slots, etc. And it is used to then build abstractions, your classes, okay? My mother slaps me every time I tell her this when she asks me what I do at work all day. But to her credit, she actually totally gets this. She was programming BASIC far before I was, so. I had a few goals when I started this out. First was state/slot management. This is something you have to do manually in pure Perl 5. This was one of the big things that I wanted to make Moose do, and I wanted to bring this into the core. I wanted us to stop having to worry about this, inheriting your state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to add support for roles. Roles are something that I really, really like. They're really, really powerful mechanism. Perl 6 has them. Moose brought them to Perl 5, but I wanted them in the core. Naturally, I wanted an API, a mop to introspect all of this. And I wanted some sort of modernized syntax. Not quite as far as Damien, but I did want something. So I want to do a little digression here. A few FOSDEMs ago, I was hanging out with Ricardo Cygnus, and we went to a talk in the ADA dev room. How many of you know what ADA is? We are in DC, right? So ADA, for those who don't know, ADA was a language developed by the Department of Defense. I'm sure they did it in a very agile way. There wasn't like years and years of committees and stuff like that. Who knows? But anyway, it was actually a language that I learned very early on, and I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of interesting, kind of neat, and so Rick and I went to this thing, and they described object orientation in ADA as a design pattern. And I never really thought about it, but immediately when I thought about Perl and Perl's OO that's in the core, this made sense, because a class is a package. This is an agreed upon convention that we were all cool with. Methods are just subroutines. Okay, we're not calling them the same thing. We just say, oh yeah, cool, it works. Inheritance is through our ISA. This is all convention. I mean, the interpreter, yes, does special things with these certain things, but it's generally convention. Blessing is a constructor. What the rest of the world calls a method send operator, we call it something different. And so those have existed in Perl, well, since Larry put them in there in the first place. So I would like to humbly propose an addition of a few other conventions. First, slots. So the entries you want to have in your class, the name of them and then something to initialize them, you can put them inside our has. Okay, it's a hash ref, it sits at the package level, and you'll see examples of how this works. Roles, I didn't want to be anything special. I actually wanted them to just be packages too. We're comfortable with packages and classes, roles and packages, and if we look at Perl 6 and their roles, roles and classes are fairly interchangeable as well. So I wanted to bring that as well. How do you compose a role? Well, geez, we got ISA, we could just use does. We already have a convention for does with universal does, which I believe Chromatic added a long time, or a couple of years ago, but it seems natural. And then I noticed a couple things. So in roles, you have a concept of a required method, essentially an abstract method that you want the consuming class to fulfill. We already have methods that have no bodies. We have a clean, simple way to do that. So these are basically they're sort of variations on existing things that are already in the core language. And I have now built a set of modules that builds on top of this idea. So in some ways, my mop proposal has no code at all. You just saw it. It's just changing the use of a few things. You actually do need some code to make this all work, but it's basically at that level of simplicity. So this talk, I've gone over every time I did it. It's got a lot of information. There's a lot of code. There's a high density to it. I'm going to run you through like 6 CPAN modules, potentially release one at the end. And it's so I'm going to go quick. Hopefully I'll have some time for questions at the end. If not, I will be out there for questions. What I'm trying to do is show you guys where I'm at with this work, and I need people to start using it and testing it and playing with it and giving me feedback. So as I said, it's going to be quick, it's going to be dense. Feel free to come ask me questions afterwards. So I'm splitting this into 3 categories to try and make it a little bit easier. There's core protocols, infrastructure. Thank you, Damien, for that word. I never thought of it that way. And then syntax. So, ready to go. Core. First module, universal object. This is on CPAN now. And what this basically does is it gives you a construction and destruction protocol for your objects. You call new, it calls build, destroy gets called, it calls demolish. This is very much Perl 6. This is also something we brought into Moose. And there's a number of other little bits in there, but essentially with, and it's all built on the idea of has is where you have your slots. Because one of the problems with Perl 5, if you want to, you can't easily inherit a constructor because your constructor has no idea what you want your class to look like. So we all had to write our own new to build our own instance in some way. If you put this information somewhere, then you don't actually need to write your own constructor. The language can figure this out for you because it has all the information it needs to construct the proper object. I've stolen a ton of crap from Perl 6 over the years, like a ton, and this is no different. Although I'm not entirely sure that I'm still in line with what Perl 6 does, but essentially new will call a method called bless. Bless will take the prototypical instance, which is basically the key value args that you passed. It will then call create. Create will then, with that prototype, call 2 other methods. Repr, to get the representation of the object, which is a hash ref, typically, and slots to get the information about the slots. So this all works together and everything plays nice together, but these are all, and this may look a little bit excessive, but these are extension points. If you want to, for instance, if you want to inherit a class and you don't have control of the constructor, you essentially use the repr. And you, instead of returning a hash ref, you essentially call that inherited constructor, and then it gets as it gets passed back through, it gets blessed into your proper class. But you use the original constructor to build the instance. This is also a very common pattern in Perl 5 as it is right now, just sort of codified there. And there's other extension points. Again, if you go through the test suite, you'll see where all they are. So what does this look like? Really awesome, modern, sexy syntax, right? Right, people? Right? No, it's not. It's not meant to be that. This is low level. This is as simple as it could possibly be. So you assign to universal object and then has. As I was saying before, let's see if this works here. I can carry this, can't I? Woohoo! Those are the names, and that's the initializer. It's just that simple. Nothing more, nothing less. And then the universal object constructor will figure out how to put all that stuff together and essentially construct your object. So that sounds all well and good, right? Now we want to subclass it. Inheritance. Take a look at that for a second. That's all it is. Okay? It just, because lists or hashes flatten, it just goes right in there and all the slots are properly inherited. Additionally, I actually know which ones are inherited because Perl actually, those subrefs deep underneath know what package they were originally compiled in, and I can introspect that. So I can see which ones you inherited and which ones you can't. You'll see more of that in the mop. But essentially, this gives us slots and a way to, and a simple pattern for inheritance. Okay? Nothing fancy. Nobody should be getting excited at all. But very low level. We're building a layer by layer here. I also recently added in something because I found a use for it and I really wanted it, immutable classes. All this does is it locks your hash ref, or it makes your SV or your scalar read-only, or your array read-only, or if you're making an object with something other than those three things, it just blows up and says, "What's wrong with you? Are you Damien or something?" So, but that basically means that if I try to assign to that X, it'll die. This is very useful. It doesn't optimize anything now, but now we're declaring that we would be happy if you were to optimize this at a later point. But it's also very useful. I mean, just the idea of immutable objects themselves are catching on in a number of different languages. It helps you reason about the code as well as potentially as a hook for optimizations. So this is so awesome. It's 5.6 back compatible. Who here still uses 5.6? What? Okay. I didn't intend that. I didn't actually intend the back compatibility. It just happened. But I'm super proud of the fact that every time I ask that question, there's no hands raised. I think Ribasushi raised his hand once at a meeting, but other than that, nobody else raised their hands. So, woohoo, we're moving forward. So that's universal object. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. It's very, very well tested at this point because it inherited all the tests of all those other repositories that I showed before. So that's one protocol. That is the core, what I like to call the instance protocol. So it's constructing your object and destructing your object. That's all it cares about. It doesn't care about anything else. For the other stuff, we have mop. This is on CPAN as mop. I actually had to track down a guy, I think he was in France or Switzerland or something like that, who had uploaded a mop module in '98 or something like that. Like there was a whole drama because he couldn't even find the laptop that had the pause ID on it. We had to get the admins involved, but I got the namespace. Mop is basically those conventions, an API that follows those conventions. It is all based on universal objects, so all the instances inherit from a universal object, following these conventions. It stores no state in itself. So one of the big problems with Moose always has been that meta objects were very expensive to create. That is when everybody talks about how slow Moose's startup is, it's because it's creating a whole boatload of meta objects. And of course, using your memory and using your CPU and all this stuff. I didn't want to repeat that mistake. So these mop classes are completely stateless. All their stuff is stored in the stash, the package stash, or stored in the internal CV, which is the code value for a method, or any other place like that. So I did my best to avoid all this stuff. I can't take questions because I got too much information later. They're also minimal overhead. You can make them and you create them. They're not meant to be stick around because they're really they just bless the thing that they're introspecting. In the case of the stash, it blesses a ref of a stash. If you want to know why, ask me later. But you can build them really easy. They're very low overhead. You throw them away when you don't need them anymore. And itself, it only builds them at the very last minute there. So it does its best to completely reduce the overhead. And as I said before, it borrows on this convention. So inheritance information is stored in ISA because it's already there. So that's where we go to look for it. Your methods are stored in the package stash, so we'd go look for them there. Your roles are stored in the does, your slot information in the has. So it's all there. In theory, and I haven't tested this theory very well, if modules like Moose and Mop and Mojo Base and Class Accessor and all these other modules that we use follows these base level conventions by storing their information in these places, in theory we'll have a nice level of compatibility across all of them. At the very least, this mop will be able to introspect them with no problem. So I do have to test that theory. I would love help on testing that theory if people want to. But so we saw this before, okay? One of the annoying bits about this is having to do that, right? Okay, because I already said I wanted point when I inherited from it, and now I've got to write point again. There's an opening for a typo, et cetera, et cetera. So the mop, you can do this. Now this looks like a lot of stuff, but you can hide this somewhere. But it's quite simple. You have a class, you create it, and that's all you have to do to create a mop class, and you have a meta object. Everybody should be using, what do you call it, the postfix deref. But we'll use that, we'll go through the MRO, and we'll build basically all the super objects that we have, and then we loop through that, we grab all those slots, and then as long as there isn't a slot that already exists there, we put this in there. And it basically gives the exact same behavior of merging those hashes. Of course, this is a lot more expensive because there's code here, and the other one, there's just Perl. But you can choose. And that's part of why I split all this up, is because then you can choose. You can choose how much of this you care about and how much you want to use, and in your environment, whether you want to take any of the expense or not have the expense. This was something we did design into Moose, but it still had a base level overhead. So I'm trying to eliminate that base level overhead here. So the mop has a ton more stuff in it, but it's essentially just an API to those concepts that we talked about. So yeah, it's kind of boring to present, to be honest. So those are the base level protocols. From here, everything from here we build on top of it, from here we build everything else on top of it. This means you can build what you want on top of this. And again, in theory, if we're all building on top of the same thing, we all have some base level of compatibility going on some level. So if you remember before, I had, I wanted some nice fancy syntax, okay? I also wanted things like role composition. Role composition is actually a tricky thing, and it's a very tricky thing in Moose particularly, because Moose basically tries to keep remaining open, tries to keep allowing you to be able to add to the classes as you go, and does a lot of sort of dances to make sure that it doesn't, that you can still add to your object. Not until you do the make immutable call or something like that at the bottom of your thing, then Moose says, okay, we're done, now I can start doing stuff. But Moose actually wastes a lot of time trying to allow you, it's the best way to put this. It wastes a lot of time basically allowing you to continue altering this object, but at any point in time expecting you to probably stop, because there's no way for me to know that you're done. So I created a couple modules that help me with that. These I would actually really like to see in core because I think they're really useful. So I wrote one called B compiler phase hook. We all know begin blocks, check blocks, init blocks, unit check blocks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How many of you knew that internally, those are all just arrays of code refs? 2, 3, 4, okay, handful of people. That's all they are. There's a module called devel hook that has tons of disclaimers about how you will destroy the world if you use it, but it gives you access to just pushing onto these things. I rewrote it because I didn't want something that would destroy the world if you used it wrong, and I wanted to make sure it was constrain a certain set of usages. But I basically wrote something that does this, and you can enqueue something for the next phase. So this is a quick, simple, silly example. You're in an import, you're assuming you're inside a begin because somebody's used your module, and you do some stuff and you inherit initialize some stuff, but you need to do something later. You enqueue a check, you enqueue an init, you enqueue a unit check. This basically gives you the ability of what's sometimes referred to as multi-phase programming. There are some languages that list macros are a sort of example of it. It's a phase before the runtime where you can do stuff. Perl has all these phases, but they're a little bit difficult to do from a dynamic point of view. This gives you that ability. Damien likes his keywords. We all saw how little effort he put into his simple solution to have his 3 little words. I don't have nearly that much patience or time on my hands. I have 4 children and a small dog and a job. I didn't have time to spend 6 months focus on one thing. So I just stole some other code from CPAN again and modified it for my own nefarious purposes. So begin lift it's much more, much less ambitious than what Damien's work did. It just, it allows you to export a word, a keyword, and have it, as soon as it is parsed, it gets called back. It executes a callback, and then it registers through the B compiler hook in the unit check to then remove itself. So essentially it allows you to expand a macro-ish type of thing, have a callback, and then remove any evidence that you had a keyword there or anything like that, even removing it out of the stash, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a quick example. If you wanted to do a moose-alike module, you wanted to, with an extends keyword that pushes onto ISA, or rather assigns ISA. And then you would have something like this, and it is functionally equivalent to saying begin, ISA, and putting the bar on there. I might be lying here. It might not be 100% functionally equivalent, but it's close enough that you probably shouldn't have to care. And pretty much just this much code. I should be afraid of C. Damien probably shouldn't, but I should, but I decided to go with the C. It's much simpler. It also uses, I forget exactly, I think it's 5.14.2 is the lowest possibility for this one. So anyway, these are infrastructure modules. They're not terribly interesting. This is one that I do find interesting, method traits. It's sort of like Perl 6 traits. It's kind of like Python decorators, and it's almost the same as Java annotations, but really it's a case for code attributes. So how many of you know what code attributes are? Okay, for those who don't know, what I'm talking about is like with Catalyst, they have the, well, here, it's easier to show. These things at the end of your subroutines, okay? The API for them is really weird. It's really awkward. There's like, you have to have methods in your class. There's all sorts of silliness. They're really hard to use. Most people who actually use them end up cutting out their own eyes and moving and living on a mountaintop or something like that because it's so horrible. So I fell in love with Java annotations and I wanted to bring them into Perl, and this seemed like a sensible place to do it. So this, we're using again the pre-declared methods because you're basically asking me to generate the method body for you. And that's how you do it. So there's a little bit of other infrastructure that I'm sort of leaving out here, but the idea is keep it really simple. We're building again on the mop. The meta is a meta class object. Method name is, oh, actually, sorry, that shouldn't be method name anymore. It's actual a method meta object, and then whatever else you had in there. So if you remember in the previous slide, the type was RO there, and then the slot name there with the X and the Y. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to sit on this slide for too long, but it's pretty easy to build these things. And then you can go back and introspect them and stuff like that. So you can see all the bits and pieces that they actually have underneath, and it'll tell you all that stuff. And then you can get even weirder and fun with them. And this I really like. Matt Trout like squealed with glee when I showed him this. I don't quite know why, but it was disturbing, really, actually, to be honest. But you can see you can begin to attach all this metadata to your methods. And this is a powerful tool because it's metadata. We can do all sorts of stuff with it. In particular, there's the implementation of that getup. I'm just letting it store the metadata there. I don't actually want to do anything at that moment in time because in reality, it's not until I actually construct the class or until I'm trying to actually get those arguments off the command line that I'm going to do anything with it. And this basically, you can see we get the code attributes, we find that we have them there, we get the traits, and we're basically just collecting what will be the op spec that we stick into getup long. Okay, so we put meta information in a way that in a place that it makes sense to a programmer, and then later on we can grab it out and we can do whatever we want with it. So these examples are a little esoteric and weird. There's a couple even more esoteric and weird ones in the actual test suite of the distribution. But if anybody's played with Java annotations and don't hate them, because there seems to be a lot of people who do hate them when they play with them. But they're a very powerful mechanism and you can do a lot of stuff with them. Python has decorators, JavaScript has this stuff as well. I think Matt Trout showed it in his ES5 talk. So this is something that's coming up in the world, and honestly, it's a great place to stick metadata in my opinion. So those are the three infrastructure modules. Now you're going to see all this stuff come together. Those three were built on the previous three, and now this last one is going to be built on top of that. It's the syntax layer, or the syn layer. I'm from Amsterdam after all. I don't really have a good name for this one, but this name is just stuck. And we tried to brainstorm a bunch of names last night, still couldn't come up with anything. And if I actually end up with time at the end of this and I release it, then it's going to be that. Unless you guys have a better idea for a name, I'm open to ideas. This is not a Moose Redux. It has similarities to Moose, but it is not compatible with Moose. It is not a redo of Moose. It's not even really necessarily new syntax. It's not really Damien's 3 words either. It's about one of Damien's 3 words, so 33.3333% of it. And it basically looks like this. So there's an important distinction I want to make here. I was accused many times by people who didn't like Moose that Moose created struct-like objects. That when you declared your attributes in Moose, basically declared your slots, you ended up with a public method. And you wanted that method because it would keep you from typoing the hash key name. It at least would blow up at you in runtime. But it sort of it mushed together the idea of slot, which is state management, and then API, which is your methods. And so I really wanted to break these two things apart. There's a little bit of redundancy going on here, but I believe it's redundancy for a good reason. So we have an extends keyword that's built with begin lift. And it essentially does what my example begin lift thing does. Pushes onto ISA, because I don't really care what it does, because again, that's where I read my information from with the mop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Has essentially just sticks a key into the %has slot container. And then these use method traits to essentially build a read-only accessor for you. So with Moose, we added a thing that imported strict and warnings. It was a little contentious. Some people liked it, some people didn't. In my justification for it was that I wanted to yank everybody into modern Perl. When you import Moxie, it turns on pretty much every experimental feature available in your running Perl interpreter. It's only 522. You have to have 522 to run this, but it takes everything from 522 on up, and I will continue adding that as Sawyer adds more and more features, because I know he will. So you have signatures. Again, woohoo! New feature without me having to write any code. Yay! So you're yanked into modernity with signatures, and ref aliasing, and postfix deref, and current sub, and lexical subs, and all those cool features. I want you to be using them. Here's again the .3D example. Pretty obvious. Please don't ever use super. Super is really, really problematic. Next method just works. And since I've dragged you into the modern world, you have no excuse, because that's 510 when it comes down to it. So these behave normal, exactly as you would expect. They take the key value args. Okay, nothing here that I'm showing you should be that surprising or potentially even that interesting. But it all works. And one of the key things that I like about it is that those classes were 100% completely built and ready to go before the run phase. So unit check is the last guard before that, and I make sure that all the role composition happens in there, the inheritance of your slots happens in there. I think I might even lock the %has, so you can't add new slots to it. I did try to lock a stash. Don't do that. It doesn't like it. Stashes underneath are actually just hash refs, or just hashes. So your package is basically implemented as a hash. But yeah, don't try and lock them. They do bad things when you do that. So again, fairly straightforward. Here's a slightly more complex case, and a weirdness to just illustrate a point. So we're extending Moxie object. In Moose, it immediately pushed Moose object into there because you had Moose and you had Moose role. So it made a big distinction between a class and a role. I don't make that big distinction, so you have to actually inherit from the base object. Moxie object only builds on universal object by adding a does method. And yeah, the reason for that is not interesting. Ask me later if you're interested. Build args is something that we have in Moose, and it basically, and it's also, again, we stole it from Perl 6. It takes the original set of arguments for you, and you can munge it in however you want, and you pass that on to new, and that's what's used to construct your object. We're using the method traits here with an init args, and it basically allows us to say, I accept the balance key, but stored in that slot. You can get really creative with this. Like with Moose, you can also put an undef there, and it will not allow you to assign the slot through the constructor. Okay, so this right here is really a definition for the API of your constructor. It's very, very simplistic. If you actually go and look at the code, it's really not very long at all. It's, as Damien would say, it's like 90% infrastructure. But it's very easy to build on this and play with this. But this allows you to define your constructor very clearly. Then we have the balance accessor, and if the name of the class is not the name of the slot, then you just put that in there and it figures it out. And then you can see the rest of everything it does. And again, yay, we have signatures. So it dies because that's not, basically the constructor says, I don't know what an underscore balance is. I don't know. You told me balance was the only thing you took as a key. And et cetera, it works as expected. So it's a little bit more verbose than Moose, but it is, and I have done zero optimization, it is only slightly slower than Moo. And basically, once I actually start optimizing, it'll be faster than that. And then if we can get some of these things into the actual core, it should be negligible. But we'll get to that later. But I need you guys to test it first too, really. So anyway, so those are fairly straightforward and simple ones. And how are we doing on time? 15 minutes. Okay, good. I might be able to release that module then. Here we're going to get a little bit fancier. Again, we extend Moose object. If you don't want to initialize this, you just want it to be set to undef, you don't have to pass that subref there. And then you're all probably wondering what that is. I'm not going to tell you right now. We're going to go through some other stuff first. Read write, read only. We also have predicates, so this is also a thing with Moose. We have clearers, which will clear out the slots. So the predicates basically tell you has something been put into the slot. The clearers will tell you, will clear the slot for you. We have a handles that will do a delegation for you. So a lot of these features in Moose have been moved out of the has definition and moved into these method trait, these annotated methods. Now, the nice thing about this is that if you were to convert this to Moose, Moose would, in the background, action at a distance, generate all these methods for you if you asked it. So you did ask it to generate that method, so I think that's fair, but Moose does have a couple extensions which you say something and it's like, oh cool, you wanted all 7 of those methods to be generated? I'll do that for you. And most people don't even know, like lazy build, for instance, in Moose, generates like 4 or 5 methods, and just about nobody knows this. They just think it does 1 or 2. These force you to explicitly say, these are subs. This is my public API. This is what other people can call in here, but you still get the same benefit of the metadata generation. This. Lexical subroutines. I'm going to take a quick step back and do a quick rant on private methods for a second. Most of you, anybody here who was ever interested in private methods or looked at any private method implementation on CPAN, like we sort of know the normal way to do this, right? Which is we check the instance, we check where we use caller, we do all this stuff to figure out, are we being called from the outside? And if we're not, we blow up. In my opinion, totally wrong. The wrong way to do this. Private methods should not be involved in the dispatch mechanism. They are private to your class. They shouldn't be involved in this at all. They shouldn't override other methods of the same name that are public. And I think a number of languages actually work in that way. Perl 6 basically did submethods. It's kind of your variant of that. And they're not involved in the dispatch mechanism, stuff like that. So lexical subroutines cannot be dispatched on. Okay? At first, I was annoyed by that. And then I thought about it for a little while, and I said, no, that does make sense. That does make sense. And then I decided to exploit it pretty heavily. That creates two subroutines, two lexical subroutines, okay? And then it generates a private accessor. How it actually goes about doing this is gnarly and nasty and weird. Should be much nicer when we put it in the core, or maybe I start writing a little bit more access. I'm not going to show it. If you want to see it, I'm happy to walk you through it. It is a little weird, but it really works, and it works quite well. There's only a few little caveats. And essentially, if you have a universal object-based class, I'm going to generate an L-value read-write accessor for you with a private method that can infer self for you. If you have an immutable object, I'm just going to make an accessor that returns stuff, because if you tried to write to it, it would blow up anyway. You see what we got down here? So Damien was all fancy with his Java syntax, right? But that was a toy. Now we can actually assign to these things, and it just works. And it's actually quite fast. It's reasonably performant, because there's no look. So subroutines have a lookup cost. The lookup cost for a private or for a lexical subroutine is the same as a lexical lookup, which is pretty fast. You look at this and you kind of go, I don't know, Steven, that's a little crazy. It's not as bad as it sounds, and it's really, really, really nice. I'd also be happy to show you a giant repository that has that uses this, and when you get a look at the code, you'll probably go, wow, I wish I had this years ago, because it's quite nice. Moxie has a lot of other stuff in it. This is sort of scratching the surface. There's a lot of weird stuff you can do with it. Or not weird stuff. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. You can go through the repository, et cetera, and look at the test suite, all that. It's not yet released on CPAN, so let's just quickly go over the status here. We have universal object. That's I made at least 11 mistakes. I consider it stable. This is based on code that I have been building on for about 3 or 4 years now. It was in the core of all of those prototypes, was this stuff. Bcompiler phase hook is beta simply because I should not write C, and I need somebody to actually read that C and make sure that I'm not doing anything stupid, and I haven't found any sucker to do that yet. And the same with begin lift, but they're pretty stable at this point. I think they're usable. Method traits also. I'm using it, I'm exercising it, I'm not finding too many places where it breaks. I'm calling it beta. The mop is stable-ish. I say ish only because the API may still be in flux. I have a lot of stuff in there. There's things that was discussed yesterday when I was showing this to people, possible additions, possible tweaks and changes, but it's good enough at this point. And then, oh wait, hold on. This is wrong. Let me, let's see if we can release. Okay. Dzil. Yeah, too late to change the name. Sorry. Can somebody just tell me what I'm supposed to write there? I can't read it. Why? No. Command plus? Oh. I like it. So I have a bit of a history with Maine, and Maine has this disgusting soda called Moxie. And so yeah, that's where it came out of basically. Okay. Yeah, you guys want to know my password? Yeah. Close. No, it's not Moxie. What do we got? We got yes. Last chance. Better names? Milk. Stevian. Dark Star was put up yesterday. I wasn't so sure about that. Okay. Dios Tiny. Thank you. In the interest of not starting a war with Australia. And he's a big guy. He'd kick my ass. Does that work? Yeah. Yay! We released a CPAN module. And now how do I get back to my presentation? Okay. So luckily I prepared, oops, wait. Luckily I prepared this slide. So we are now at 0.01 for Moxie, and it is very alpha. As I said, this is the culmination of a long period of work. There's a huge amount of thinking and context and stuff that has gone through my brain over all this. At this point, I've got to get it out of my head. I've got to get it to the community. I've got to get you people looking at it. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, that's fine. I'm going to go write Go anyway, probably Swift a little bit, so it doesn't matter. No, I needed to get out there. I need to know if I'm insane or if I have a good idea going, et cetera, et cetera. So please, please, please play with these things, use them, put them in production. Don't call me if they break, but okay. So we got 5 minutes left. Questions? I think, hold on, Mark, oh, Mark's gone. Okay.
Two things I didn't see, those I could use builder sub.
Yes.
Will there be
Yes. It receives the, just like with Moose, it receives the self-reference and it receives the hash ref original args that you put in.
More
Yeah.
interesting than that, nothing you said about sort of attributes like laziness and stuff like that.
Okay, so there's,
Private stuff like that, yes,
Yeah.
that's that, but laziness.
yeah. So the question was essentially, do we have support for laziness with building slots lazily? Directly, no. If you look, oh crap. If we go back to here, that left and right down there are how you would do lazy. So you end up being a little bit more explicit. You're basically doing the defined or to assign that. I have a few examples in one of these repos about how you can implement laziness on top of all these things, but I'm not happy with any of them completely yet. The one that I'm the most happy with involves tie, and that makes me sad. So, so we'll get there, but in the meantime, you can do it yourself. The only other thing that I will mention that is missing, Moose thing that is missing here is types. I'm purposefully avoiding putting types inside an object system again. Because there's a number of, yeah, Dave. Dave knows the pain because I gave it to him and he co-mainted it. There's a number of really good type libraries out there. I don't play favorites. I have 4 kids, I know how this works. So it's up to you to add this. You saw method traits, super easy to add this into it. I will accept patches for some sort of way to add this ability in Moxie a little bit more, but again, I'm not really sure that it belongs there. One of the things about my spending a year looking at the core of Perl was that I came to appreciate more the dynamic nature of Perl, and I actually kind of like the type system that Perl has, which is scalars, arrays, and hashes, and other stuff. But like not making a distinction in those scalars, I've come around to think that's not a bad thing. But type validation is useful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can do it on your own right now. Anyway. Okay, next.
So you've been mentioning for some time that you're hoping to push something to core. I'm curious, how much of this are you hoping to move in that direction?
So when I first started this project, I spoke to the Pumpkin Jesse Vincent, and he said, you should make sure this goes up on CPAN first, dog food this yourself, get other people to dog food it. Sorry, the question was, is this going in core, essentially? Then when I was working on it a little bit later, I talked to the then Pumpkin Ricardo Cygnus, who said the exact same thing. No, you don't get special privileges, Steven, damn it. And I had to put it on CPAN. And then even though Sawyer, even though I was his boss, he still said to me, no, you can't just put it in core. It doesn't work that way. So that's why I'm asking for help. That's why I'm asking for people to test. I think universal objects should go into core. Mop could go into core. If they can reach into the guts, they can do things faster. If we can just read in XS to reach into the guts. I don't think I'm messing with anything that is actually sort of verboten inside the core. So I don't think it actually has to be put into core, but obviously it'd be faster. But eventually, Ask Sawyer.
As a random contributor to Perl, I was wondering if you have any plan to submit this to core for
Come talk to me later. I know somebody. Okay. You've had your hand up for.
So you said that mostly was using the unit check time to do its stuff. Would it be possible to a little earlier beyond fading, or is not one?
It can't. Well, maybe. I thought I was able to do everything in begin time, but the subroutine attributes, method traits rather, that happens I think in check time. And then also begin time, if you wanted to dynamically load a class, begins over, but unit check will fire. So unit check will basically fire at the end of every compilation unit. So if you require a file or do a file or something like that, it becomes a compilation unit and the unit check will fire there. So this allows you to have more of a dynamic loading of classes too. But it would be nice if the further up we can push it, absolutely. But if you know anybody who knows core, you might want to help. Next.
Did you consider adding blocks?
No. They just shadow each other. That's what everybody's used to. Adding namespacing would basically, I think it would confuse things in some way. And if I'm overriding a slot from, slots get overridden, or slots are inherited, just like methods. I think that's a pretty standard convention for Perl. I sort of know where you're going with this, but I think it would go against Perlishness to do that. There's only so much bondage and discipline that the Perl community will suffer through, and I think that would maybe go a little bit too far. But I'm happy to debate it with you, and if you have a better solution, we can talk. Brock.
I may have missed it. Did you have any demo of like roles or what an idea for roles would be?
Oh crap! I forgot that slide. Blame John. Okay. So that's a good question. So yes, I didn't see any demo or I didn't see anything for a role. A role is just a package. A Moxie role will just say use Moxie at the top, and actually internally in Moxie, we assume everything is a role first until you actually try to inherit something, at which point we upgrade it to a class, just in our internal mechanisms. So this actually means that you can treat a class as a role if you want to, because it's essentially a subset of a role. It just ignores the inheritance relationship and any inherited methods and stuff like that.
How would you consume the role? How would you say?
Magic. How do you say with, just like within Moose, and it registers to be composed at the unit check time. Yeah, I should put a slide in for that, really. Wow. Okay, thanks. Yes. So in roles, when you go through the composition process, those abstract subs are treated as required methods, and then through the natural process of role composition, they need to be, you have to fulfill those requirements. So in the space of role composition, it'll blow up if that hasn't been fulfilled. So unit check time is when that happens. I had a version of this that also had abstract classes. I believe that those would also be really nice. Abstract classes, roles can be thought of as an abstract class, but an abstract class also has its own usefulness. It basically means that the constructor dies if there's an abstract method within the method hierarchy. It puts a lot of it forces a lot of work into the constructor. To do this, I haven't figured out how to make that, basically to amortize that work away. So yeah, but they unit check. Like I said, everything should be done by the time you hit the run phase. Okay, how are we doing on time? We done? Okay, we got 15 minutes in, people. No. Any other questions? Anything? No? Okay. Live demo. I just released a CPAN module. Come on. Thank you.